Chapter 5 The Great Deluge. "You, father?" Abram asked with amazement. "Well, my grandfather and I," Noah stated. "Methuselah had a dream, and afterwards I myself had a vision of similar kind. In it, a messenger of the eternal God appeared before us and told us this: 'Thus saith the Most High, the Eternal, My spirit shall not always strive with man on account of the wickedness of man. For it grieves me at the heart that I made man on account of their wickedness and their violence. Behold, I give you a period of 120 years. Speak to the sons of men and entreat them to forsake their evil ways, that I may not bring upon them this great disaster.'" "And did you tell them?" Abram asked. "Yes," Noah nodded. "For 120 years my grandfather and I walked among the sons of men, and implored them to return to the Eternal One, their God. But they mocked us, spat in our faces, threatened us with imprisonment and death. They said to our faces, 'Where is the Eternal One? We see our gods, and we know that they exist. We do not see the Eternal, therefore he does not exist.' Others called us fear-mongers, and called the Eternal One cruel for threatening them when they had done, in their eyes, no great evil." "Bah!" Noah spat upon the ground. "It was nothing in their eyes to mock the eternal God with their violence and their abominations. How dare they slander the Eternal and seek to judge him, as though he were within their power to judge?" He paused for a moment, breathing deeply. Abram put a hand on his shoulder, but he dismissed it. "It is a hard matter for me, my son. I struggled with this sorely the weeks and months after the flood. Perhaps that is why I turned to wine, to ease my own pain. I feel that I could have done something more to persuade them, but I know not what. My grandfather and I would entreat them with tears, with pleading, with strong words, with soft words, as teachers to their children and as fathers to their sons. But they refused to hear our words. Then a vision came to me, and not to my grandfather. The messenger of the eternal God said to me, 'Thus saith the Most High God, the end of all flesh is come before me. The earth is filled with violence through the sons of men and their deeds. Therefore I will destroy them with the earth. But you I have chosen to preserve the seed of man, for of all the generation of the sons of men, you alone are righteous. Therefore destroy your house, and make thee an ark of gopher wood.'" Noah gestured with his staff towards the high hills, whereupon the young Abram had seen the massive ship. "Even as you saw the ship 7 years ago, so were its dimensions. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, 3 stories, a door in the side, daubed inside and outside with pitch. For behold, the Eternal One's messenger told me, I shall bring a flood of water upon the earth, and everything upon the earth wherein is the breath of life shall be destroyed." "So what happened?" Abram asked. "I did as the Eternal One instructed," Noah began. "With the help of my grandfather Methuselah and his family, and my small family, we built the ark. It wasn't easy, though. Cutting and hauling wood was one thing, but we had to create pitch to seal the ark and adhesive to bind the boards together, all by ourselves. For the hull, we didn't use one single board. We had 3 boards, each of them bound tightly together to create one solid board. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, and so the hull of 3 boards would be sturdy in the coming waters. To fasten the boards together, we had to smelt our own ironmongery. Nothing could be outsourced, for none were our allies. Many came to gawk and mock and laugh at us as they had during our ministry. Once the hull had started coming together, I reckoned that we needed to keep her steady in the water. I often sent my sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, down to the rivers to test smaller versions of the ship and how they would stay afloat in the water. By this, I learned 2 things. 1, that we needed ballast to keep the bottom hull firmly in the water. 2, if a wave struck the ark on the side, being as long and narrow as it was, we would be in danger. So we dragged together some very large stones, chiseled out a hole in the top, and strung these to the stern to keep the bow pointed towards the waves. He pointed out into the fields beyond the stone fence of the house. "Those stones you see in the fields around us? Those were our anchor stones. from the stern of the ship. As for ballast, we used the slag from our homemade forges." "What an incredible story!" Abram exclaimed. "You think this is all a story?" Noah asked, a curious look in his eyes. "Even after seeing the ark with your own eyes?" "No, that's not what I meant, Father," Abram returned. "Forgive me. I only meant what you said about building the ark. It's incredible." But Noah was not quite finished with this. "Has all that I told you so far been for nothing? Do you still doubt what I have said?" "No, of course not," Abram returned. "I believe the Eternal is God." "As well you should," said Noah. "The word of the Eternal came true. And while I will not boast of being a prophet, for nothing that I say comes from myself, but from the Eternal, the ark, and the rainbow, and the changed world, is proof enough that these things came to pass." "But, well," Abram stammered, I mean, what about the others out there? Out beyond the confines of this valley, and these mountains? What did you call them?"
"The walls of heaven," Noah replied.
"Yes, that's it. Outside of that, they don't have this. They can't come here and see the ark."
"Yes, I know," Noah nodded. "And in time, I myself will go the way of all men, and they will not be able to come here and sit at my table and learn the truth and question it as you have."
"I don't question what you have said," Abram replied defensively. "I only ask this. How will they come to believe what you say if they cannot see it as I have?"
"Faith," Noah replied.
"What is faith?"
"Faith is the evidence of what you cannot see or touch with your hands," Noah began. "Abel had faith that the Eternal would answer his sacrifice if he gave him precisely what was asked for, and so his faith was rewarded. Enoch had faith that by diligently seeking the Eternal God through prayer and separation from the evils of the world, he would not be disappointed. And he was not disappointed, for the Eternal not only spoke to him, but was pleased by his great faith, and so translated him into heaven without seeing death. And it was an act of faith that I believed the message of the Eternal and built the ark."
"How so?" Abram asked. "Did you not see the Garden of Eden and the fiery sword?"
"Yes, I did, as many others had," Noah replied. "Many others who went on slandering the Eternal and blaspheming him, even after they had seen the evidence with their eyes. But there were other factors in this. Not since Enoch had the Eternal appeared to his people. Even my father Lamech doubted that he still cared for us. Also, the utter depravity of the children of men at that time was almost enough for one to give up hope that the Eternal, a righteous and merciful judge, could truly be with such evil running rampant and free. Also, the idea of a worldwide flood was unheard of. Gihon had flooded its boundaries centuries before, but that was only a little flood compared to the Great Deluge. Furthermore, there was no rain. The dew of heaven watered the earth. There were many reasons to doubt the word of the Eternal, most especially the calumny of our neighbors and the other children of men."
"How did you do it, though?" Abram asked. "How did you go on with so much going against you?"
"Faith, my son," Noah repeated. "I believed that which the Eternal had promised, he would most certainly perform it, as did my grandfather. And so, we dedicated the rest of our lives to building that ark. My grandfather Methuselah died the week of its completion, having lived 906 and 9 years. After we buried him, the word of the Eternal God came to me, again, to gather into the ark myself, my family, and every beast and fowl upon the earth, 2 of every sort, and by 7s of all beasts that divide the hoof and chew the cud. Also, there was seed and provender to be stored up in the ark, for the animals as well as for my family. And so they came, gathered together at the ark by the will of the Eternal. When we had finished leading them in, we ourselves went into the ark. And no sooner had we entered, but a bright apparition came and sealed shut the massive door that we had made. For the next 7 days, our faith was tested. Living in cramped quarters with so many animals, it was a nightmare. Then there came a great earthquake, which ruptured the ground. From the window of the ark I could see fountains of water many miles high, towering into the sky, spreading water around them.
Then the rains came, ceaseless, unending rain for 40 days and 40 nights. He sighed grimly. I still hear their cries at night, when I sleep. 700,000 men and women outside the ark, clamoring for me to let them in. But not a single repentant soul among them. How do you know? Abram asked. The Eternal let them alone for over 1,000 years, and they rebelled against him. For 120 years they had opportunity to repent, and they spat in his face, even as they spat in ours. Even when the rains came down upon them, they would not accept that the Eternal had done this. Heed their example, my son. A man who defers faith and obedience until there is no danger of failure or defeat will never believe nor obey. I will, Father, Abram nodded. Now please, continue. Noah nodded. They begged me to let them in, and I refused on account of what I had said. They tried to take the ark by force, but the Eternal One sent the beasts, the monsters they had created, to run wild upon them and so drive them away from their purpose. And then the waters continued to rise, bearing over and over against the sides of the ark. Then, with a sudden lurch, the waters were so great, and the ark was lifted above the earth, and floated upon the waters of the flood. For 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and nothing outside the ark remained alive. I tell you, my son, we were all in great fear in those days. We feared that every wave would break us, and the animals cried out in their own tongues, for the fear of being tossed back and forth like stew in a cauldron. And so we prayed, and begged the Eternal One to remember us. And he did. Eventually the rain ceased, and we drifted along the waters. I could see no sight of land from the ark's windows, and we even took a sounding at one point, 15 cubits down to the tops of the hills. But by and by things were starting to happen. Once the rain ceased, I sent out a raven to see if the land had returned. But he returned empty-handed. I also sent out a swallow, but the swallow also came back empty-handed. Lastly, I sent out a dove, who came back, for there was no place for her to rest. After another 7 days, I sent her out again, and she returned in the evening with an olive leaf in her beak. I tell you, never was I more excited to see that leaf, nor has there ever been a better sign of the end of the turmoil of the flood, and the eternal God's peace between him and my family, and I than the dove bearing that leaf. In my eagerness, I sent her out again after another 7 days. But she never returned. After a full year had passed, we finally came to rest here, in the region of the mountains of Ararat. At the command of the Eternal, we came out of the ark, my family and all the creatures that were with us. In that day, I built an altar, the very one we use every day on the western side of this valley, and offered one of every animal that divides the hoof and chews the cud. And the eternal God smelled the offering and so gave us 5 commands. First, that he would put the fear of man into the hearts of the creatures of the field. Second, that the beasts of the field were to be as food for us, even as the fruits and green herbs were as well. Third, that no one should do any murder, for he would require the blood of any life we take. Fourth, to be fruitful and multiply, as Adam and Eve were told in the Garden of Eden. The 5th thing the Eternal did was make a covenant with us, my family, our descendants, and all the beasts of the field and the fowl of the air and their descendants. What was that? Abram asked. As long as the earth should last, in springtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night, he would never again destroy the earth with a flood of water. As a token of his covenant, he set the rainbow in the clouds, which is seen when the clouds of rain do come. And that covenant he has not broken in all these years, though the children forget him. He turned back to Abram. So you see, my son, there is very good reason to have faith in the Eternal, for he always keeps his promises. The story continues in chapter 6.